In today's video, I'm going to cover one of the most essential mindset shifts that you need to have to ensure that your brand or business doesn't just fail before it even gets started. And I'm going to cover 5 of my favorite tips to ensure you can create that shift. Beautiful people, another week means another video. I hope you're enjoying them so far. If this is your first time here, then I'm Giles, and I basically spend a lot of time here building my brand or out walking my dog Darwin. But I've also now decided to start creating actionable content that will hopefully stop you making the same costly mistakes that I made over the last 6 years building my brand to where it is today. Now, if you watched the introduction video that I uploaded a couple of weeks ago, you would have heard me say, the lift is broken and the stairs are hard to find, as if I'm some drunk person wandering around a hotel lobby at 3 AM. And much like the intoxicated person, I'm not sure whether that is a good metaphor or if I'm just speaking kind of gibberish. However, in the overarching theme of Jack Lemmon's quote of sending the elevator back down, I've come to realize that in a world with ideal education, we shouldn't need to send the elevator back down. There's a systematic flaw in the reasoning about why we need to send it down. In effect, that means the lift is broken. Prepare yourself, because it's time for a bit of a rant. For most of us around the world, if we're lucky, we get to spend the majority of the first 2 decades of our life in education. Ideally, an education would set us up to make the most out of the fleeting time we have on this planet. And it's old news that most education systems rely on dated practices to impart wisdom on the youth. But it still doesn't stop my head from just exploding every so often to see that the system seems to lack so much in the fundamental areas that are now crucial to the world that we live in today. I finished school at 18. And I didn't go to university. That's college for Americans. And in those 18 years, I received 0 training or education in personal finance, business economics, saving money, investing, taxes. All of that stuff was adult stuff that I just kind of assumed I would learn in later life. I just figured at some stage someone would tell me or I'd figure it out. The problem with that is that I'd already made too many costly mistakes by the time I did figure it out. Most of these topics sneak up on you, leaving you to try and figure it out whilst also dealing with a whole host of other issues you face as you stumble into true adulthood. Why are we not getting taught this stuff earlier? You could argue that we wouldn't want to know that stuff when we're teenagers, but really I think that just comes down to applying the right kind of teaching. You could argue that it's up to the parents to share their knowledge of these crucial life skills with their kids. But if they weren't taught this stuff at school either, they don't necessarily have it all figured out. We've somehow got this trickle-down effect of poor education in some of life's most important areas, when the schools that we pay taxes to fund could be fixing this. Obviously, you can go on to do courses at university in these fields, but only after you commit to tens of thousands of pounds of debt and after you've already shown an interest in these areas in the first place. So hopefully you get why I say it now. The system is flawed, the lift is broken. All school does is teach you to be a nice, obedient employee. But if you want to become more than that, if you want to become financially literate, to provide for your family, to build business and leave a legacy, you need to take things into your own hands and adopt a growth mindset. You need to become a lifelong learner. Now, speaking of being a lifelong learner, it's important to repeat the words of the American entrepreneur Jim Rohn, who said, "If you let your learning lead to knowledge, you become a fool. If you let your learning lead to action, you become wealthy." What he meant here is that you can read and consume all the books and information in the world, but unless you actually take action on that and implement what you've learned, you're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to move forward. Now, you've probably already heard about having a fixed or a growth mindset before. Someone with a fixed mindset will typically proclaim they can't do something without even trying it. And they like to assume that you either have it or don't, whatever it may be. However, someone with a growth mindset is a lot keener to try something new, as they're aware they can always learn how to improve. But the thing to be aware of is that it's not one or the other. It's kind of a sliding scale. If you're anything like me, for several years after I finished school, I never really gave like a conscious thought to actively learning anything. Of course, I still learned stuff. I was a freelance filmmaker, so I was learning and improving all the time, but it was more passive. It was learning on the job, focusing on the particular skill or editing style that I needed to learn. But I wasn't really taking a conscious effort to try and learn and widen my skill set. It was just happening as and when it needed to. While I don't think I was truly in a fixed mindset, I certainly wasn't growing and learning nearly as much as I could have done. I had no idea how to organize the finances of my filmmaking career, and I wasn't in the mindset that I could improve the situation through learning more. I just told myself I was bad with money. The power of a growth mindset is that you can constantly improve if you continue to learn how. Technically, nothing is really out of your limits. Obviously, that's not to say things will suddenly become easy just by proclaiming that you want to learn more. In fact, your life will almost certainly get more challenging, but that's how you grow. The hint is in the name. A growth mindset is about embracing challenges, knowing that failure will come, but it won't break you. Being able to take feedback and criticism without it stopping you in your tracks. Thanks to the power of the internet, we now have access to every bit of information in the world, and there's obviously a ton that will never resonate with you. But the opportunity to find what interests you, to find your purpose, to find what puts you into that flow state where hours can fly by is right there, only if you decide to look for it. Purpose can't be given, it can only be found. So I have 5 main tips when it comes to developing a growth mindset. And the first one is that you have to embrace imperfection. Repeat after me. No one is perfect. No one has it. And just because someone is better at you than something doesn't mean you can't do it as well. Looking at an imperfection in your life as an unchanging flaw makes it impossible to improve upon. You just characterize it as part of your being, and over time, it becomes ingrained in your personality. Instead, if you can look at imperfections as things that can be improved upon, you can begin down the path of growth. Of course, if the world was perfect, we wouldn't really compare ourselves to others, but most of us do. And many factors in life can make things easier or harder for certain people, and sometimes things can feel totally unfair. But there are so many stories of people taking imperfections and disadvantages, turning them around and turning them into these runways for incredible growth and success. If you want a really interesting book that dives into this topic, it's Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath: Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. My next tip is pretty simple, but it can make a massive difference. It's curate what you consume. Try and curate who and what you follow online and in day-to-day life to align with your general interests. Stop trying to follow all the Hollywood gossip and things that really in the long term don't actually benefit your life. They might be entertaining in the short term, but if you zoom out and look at that bigger picture, do they really provide you with any value? I've come to accept that a level of distraction and procrastination is inevitable. So although you want to limit how much time you spend aimlessly scrolling on your phone, you may as well try and curate that so that everything you consume is aligned with your interests and inspires you. If I take Twitter, for example, although I don't actually tweet a lot, I check Twitter a few times a day, and I've got a fairly concise list of people that I follow that are mainly brand owners, entrepreneurs, and experts within the space of e-commerce. So that way, if I'm procrastinating from what I should be doing, at least I'm learning or gaining some inspiration. Just make sure you actually try and implement what you learn, or at the very least, write it down for future reference. My next tip is to become a problem solver. Just think back to that Jim Rohn quote for a second. If you let your learning lead to knowledge, you become a fool. If you let your learning lead to action, you become wealthy. If you just tell yourself, I want to have a growth mindset, nothing's gonna happen. Wherever you are in life, you're gonna have things that need to be improved on for you to move forwards. This is the same for every human on the planet. These could be simple things you encounter once, learn the solution to, and then move on, such as how to charge your phone, or far more complex things such as why your business keeps running out of money every month. No matter the problem, no matter how big or small it is, all issues are solved by identifying the issue, educating yourself on the solution, and then taking action to solve it. You'll do this almost every day on a smaller scale, but you're just not really thinking about it. Additionally, because life isn't always smooth sailing, you'll also experience mistakes and failures in the exact same circumstances. They're normally just too minor to really bother you. Look at the following scenario, which is probably pretty relatable for some of you. You get a new camera, you turn it on, you take some test photos, but they come out completely black. You read the instructions to educate yourself on the camera's exposure settings. You adjust the settings, take more photos, but they're still coming out black. You then realize the lens cap is on and briefly feel like an idiot. You had a problem, you educated yourself, still encountered the problem, looked at things from a different perspective, which is another way of educating yourself, and eventually found the solution. If you want to improve your mindset, the first thing you have to do is make yourself super aware of the process that takes place everywhere in life. Problem, education, action, solution. Sometimes that action doesn't result to a solution, so you go back to education. It's as simple as that. Once you become aware of this, you can scale this thinking to everything in life. Things you don't know how to do are not things you can't do. They're just things you don't know how to do yet. All it takes is educating yourself whenever you encounter a problem. My next tip is don't be afraid of experimenting. Value the process. It's more of a continuation of my previous point, but the best lessons in life come from trying something and analyzing why you failed or succeeded and just how the whole process panned out. The problem with experimenting is that starting an experiment requires a crucial step: the commitment to starting. The important thing to realize with experimenting is that it doesn't always need to have some huge final and successful result. People assume that changes in your life have to be some sudden realization followed by a drastic pivot in a new direction, but it rarely actually happens like that. The majority of changes come from small, incremental changes in habits that eventually lead you in a positive or negative direction. It's only when you look back a long time later do you see the true effects of that change. From the outside, it might seem like an overnight change, but to you, it's never gonna feel like that. Once you realize that the experiments in your life can be gradual, the commitment to starting is so much easier. Let's take the example I gave earlier of a business running out of money every month. So in this example, we're already aware of the solution to the problem. The business isn't charging enough for its products and it's overspending on unnecessary expenses. We've learned this through studying the business and educating ourselves on what's going wrong. However, while immediately upping the prices and cutting all unnecessary expenditure is the obvious thing to do, these drastic changes would almost certainly have a negative effect if implemented overnight. Customers would be upset at the price rise, and the business teams can't work the way they used to if all their fancy software subscriptions are cancelled with no warning. This immediately makes the change feel like a failed test, whereas in reality, it was actually just put into effect too quickly. Instead, if we experiment and implement smaller changes over a longer period of time, for example by increasing product margins slowly and transitioning the staff to new, more cost-effective software through training programs, we can eventually solve the problem without a huge disruption. But as we all know, things don't always go smoothly and mistakes can happen. Maybe increasing the company's product margins by 3% each month is too much, or maybe it's not enough. However, because we're looking at this as an experiment, and from the perspective of a longer time frame, rather than trying to make it an overnight success, it's easier to make small adjustments to what we're doing to ensure things turn out how we want them to. Analyze and enjoy the process. Nothing worth doing is easy, and great things rarely happen overnight. So my next tip is that you just need to persist. As we've just learned, a huge part of a growth mindset is persistence. If something isn't sticking, don't write off everything immediately. Just keep searching, keep experimenting. Find value in the small improvements you see and build from there. If you're trying to learn more and it doesn't feel like it's sinking in, try a different medium of how you're consuming things. Whether that's books, YouTube, videos, podcasts, or even just learning through practical experiments. You can even try and implement your learning at different times in the day. When you start to find something that works for you, just hone in on it and make those gradual improvements over time. Additionally, if you don't feel like you've found your passion yet, apply the same approach to other areas in your life. Try new things, don't be afraid to fail at first, and don't shy away from finding a passion where maybe you didn't expect to find it. Back when I was a filmmaker, I learned on the fly. I rarely shied away from a challenge, and while filmmaking was certainly my passion at the time, I wasn't focusing on improving and expanding my mindset with regards to other areas of my life. I only read fiction books, and I didn't really have any thoughts about taking an active approach to my personal development. I was just living life and dealing with what came my way. But as I transitioned into running my brand for the first time, I felt totally out of my depth. I had no idea what I needed to do to keep the thing growing, and I only had two options: give up or persist. And it was here my passion for learning and taking action on that knowledge truly blossomed. I never expected to find this stuff so interesting, improving my mindset, and it was just never something that really crossed my mind until I realized that it was the one thing in the way of stopping me improving in all areas of my life. And once I kind of unlocked that door, I became somewhat obsessed. That being said, just remember, I'm still figuring it out myself. You're still figuring it out. No one is perfect. Like I said at the start, no one is perfect. These are just my notes from the first floor, and I hope they help.